Baba Kama Daf Lametet Nu Mishnah Shor Shel Pikeach Shenagach Shor Shel Hare Shote V'Katan Chayav V'Shel Hare Shote V'Katan Shenagach Shor Shel Pikeach Patur. If an ox that is owned by a competent person gores an ox that's owned by a deaf person, someone who's not mentally competent, or a minor, that of the competent person, he has to pay. He caused damage and he is fully responsible because he's competent, so certainly he has to pay. They're just on the receiving end, so that doesn't stop them. They have ownership, right? Cheresh Shotev Katan can own property, so, and if their property is damaged, then they need to get paid. But the other way around, if the ox that belongs to someone that is incompetent because they're deaf, and in those days they didn't know how to teach deaf people, so they were not mentally all there, or someone who's just generally mentally not competent, or a minor who's not yet old enough to be responsible, so these people are not held responsible for their actions, and not even for their own actions, and certainly not for the actions of their property and for their ox. And therefore, if their ox goes and gores someone, they do not have to pay. Shor shel cheresh shotev katan shenagach betin ma'amidin lahen apotropos u'me'idin lahem bifnei apotropos. An ox that belongs to a cheresh shotev or katan that gores someone, the betin will appoint for them a steward, and who will be responsible for their affairs, and the witnesses come and testify in front of that steward, and then they will, right, it doesn't say explicitly, but presumably, then they will have to pay. Because although they are, let's say it's a minor and is not responsible for his own affairs, but this adult who is responsible for the minor's property, he has to take responsibility, and if it requires safeguarding or whatever, so he will pay. The Gemara will note that these two paragraphs seem to contradict, because this one seems to say that they don't have to pay, whereas this paragraph seems to say that they appoint a steward, and then their property, they would have to pay from their property, or maybe the apotropos has to pay. That we'll get into as well. All right, so we'll solve that in a minute. Nitpakeya hacheresh nishtapa hashote vehigdil hakatan chazal letamuto dibred b'meir b'yose omed harehu behizkato. Let's say someone was deaf when their ox gored and 3 times, and they became a shor mu'ad, or and then they got better, or someone was not mentally competent and his ox gored and became a mu'ad, and so presumably that's because they appointed a steward over it and became a mu'ad, but then he got better. Or he was a minor when it gored 3 times and became a mu'ad, and then the child became an adult. Once they become an adult, the ox that they own goes back to its original status and is not mu'ad anymore, is now tam according to Rabbi Meir. The reason seems to be that the ox will act better when its owner is in control of it. So maybe it was only mu'ad and acting violently because it didn't have an owner, even if it has a steward, but the steward is not as close to the animals and as careful with them and taking care of them. Maybe the animal, is acting out. Like it's when the teacher is there, the kids are all behaving. But when a sub comes in, then they're not so careful with they act disrespectfully to the substitute teacher. So maybe it's something like that. When the actual owner is not around, so then the animal acts in a wild way, even under the apotropos. But when the original owner becomes sane or becomes an adult, then they will act better. So therefore, it goes back to being a shor tam according to the Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yosef omed harehu bechizkato. Rabbi Yosef says no, it remains whatever it was before, and if it became a mu'ad while the owner was a child, it remains a mu'ad even when it grows up the ox is not going to change. It's inherent in the ox's personality that it is mu'ad, and it doesn't matter what the status of the owner is. Shor ha'itz tadin eno chayav mitah shenemar ki yigach velo sheyagichu. The last law of the Mishnah is that a stadium ox, this is an ox that is used to perform in a stadium for ox fights, and if it goes and gores and kills a person, normally an ox that kills a person out in the street, you have to bring it to court. You judge it in court and you give it the death penalty. But this one you do not. Why? Because the pasuk says, if an ox gores, that means it went on its own and became very wild and it gored and killed an animal. But not if it's induced to gore. The ones in the stadium, the people running the show would instigate. And they would sometimes harm the animal to get it all angry and riled up, and then it would go. So really, it's not the animal's nature to be so violent and to kill someone. It's the people that incited it to do so. So therefore, it does not deserve the death penalty. All right, Gemara says, Hagufa Kashya. The first two paragraphs of this Mishnah seem to contradict. Amart, Shor shel cheresh shotev katan shenagach shor shel pekeach patur, alma en ma'amidin apotropos letam ligbot migufo. From the first clause, that says that an ox of someone who is not competent that gores that of someone who is competent, they do not have to pay, right? Because they're not responsible themselves. And it seems from here that we do not appoint a steward over a shor tam, that such that you would have to, such that you would collect from the value of the goring animal. Reason seems to be that this is just a fine, and apotropos generally is not going to have the authority to take money from the as a steward from the orphans, the minors, as an apotropos. Okay, so there's various reasons given here. Okay, so so the first clause anyway, the point is that the minor, I'm using an example of a minor, but the same as choresh and shoteh, a minor does not have to pay at all, and there's no apotropos appointed. But look at the second paragraph. Emasefa shor shel cheresh shoteh vekatan shenagach be'etin ma'amidin lahem apotropos u'midin lahem bifnei apotropos alma me'imidin lahem apotropos letam ligbot migufo. The second clause says seems to be the same exact case, that an ox that gores, an ox of a minor that gores, Betin will appoint an apotropos, and then the witnesses to the event will come and testify in front of the steward who is stands in for the owners. And that would sound like we do appoint an apotropos, and therefore when they come and testify, hey, this ox that was tam gored, then they would have to pay from the value of the goring animal. So they would have to pay. Well, which one is it? Amar Rava hachikatane v'im huchziku chanin ma'amidin lahen apotropos u'midin lahen bifnei apotropos u'mishavinan lehu mu'ad techi hadar v'nagach leshalem me'aliyah. Rava explains as follows. The first these paragraphs are going in chronological order. The first paragraph says that when it gores, let's say a first time, so they do not pay, and there's no steward there, and even the second time and third time. However, once the ox of this minor gores 3 times, and again, witnesses don't come because there's no one on the other side to come and to Betin because they're minors. But if we see that it already is goring many times and has a chazakah, then the Betin will appoint a steward and then bring the witnesses to those events and say, listen, it gored once, twice, 3 times. Not to make him pay, right? The apotropos will still not have to pay for the damage when it was tam, but rather the point of this whole thing is to now make it a mu'ad, such that if it would gore a 4th time, then the apotropos would be responsible to pay a full amount, and even from superior quality land. So that's the first 2 paragraphs. The first one indeed is without apotropos. The minors are not responsible for the actions of their short tam, and we don't even have to appoint apotropos, right? Just too bad. And however, if this is a regular pattern, then once it gored enough times that it can become a mu'ad, so then we bring the witnesses, we bring the apotropos, it becomes a mu'ad, and then they will be liable. All right, good. So now we understand the first 2 paragraphs very well. Next question is this: l'shalem me'aliyat man? Who is responsible for paying for the damage of the shor mu'ad of a minor, right? We got shor tam doesn't pay. Shor mu'ad does pay because you got an apotropos, but who's responsible? Rabbi Yochanan amar me'aliyat yetomin. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina amar me'aliyat apotropos. Rabbi Yochanan says the apotropos will be responsible to extract the money from the estate of the minors. And so it's their money that has to pay. It's their ox, and so their land will be given over to the nizak. Rabbi Yosef, however, says, no, the steward himself has to pay from his own property. He was responsible to make sure that these animals would not gore, and if he is a delinquent in his responsibility, then he's responsible to pay. Okay, now the question, did Rabbi Yochanan really say that we make the orphans pay from their own money, on land? We have the following machloket, where Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav Aseh, says, we do not go and take the property of orphans, except in the case of interest that's eroding their estate. If, let's say, a father had borrowed money from a non-Jew with interest, and now he died, and the estate goes to the Yatomim, and now you have a steward who's in charge of it, and now they're paying an interest payment, right? Every month they're paying a lot of money. So now you're going to wait till, let's say the kid is 5 years old, you're going to wait till it becomes an adult, and the whole time you're going to be paying interest. Well, this is going to erode the estate. So we can't let this go on. And therefore, the steward has authorization to pay the entire debt up front from the property, so that they will not have to pay interest. But that's it. That's all he can do. And other things like paying for damage, wait till he's an adult, and then he'll pay you for that. But the steward does not extract money from that. That is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yochanan amar, l'ishta sheyesh bo ribit, lichtubat isha mishum mezoneh. Rabbi Yochanan adds another exception to the rule. He agrees that the steward is authorized to take the property of the orphan to pay for a loan document that's recorded in writing that has interest, because you don't want to erode the property by paying interest the whole time. That's one he agrees with, and he adds another one to pay a ketubah of the wife. Because of sustenance. The law of ketubah is that as long as she does not collect the major amount of the ketubah, the estate is responsible to provide for the widow food, clothing, shelter, as long as she's around. And so this will be a regular payment, a daily payment that is going to come from the estate. However, if they pay the lump sum, whatever is written in the ketubah, right, the basic, the full amount, whatever the basic amount is, 100 or 200 plus whatever additional is said there. If they pay the lump sum, then they say, okay, here's your ketubah payment, and then we're done, and they don't have to pay anything else, and she has to pay for her own sustenance from that lump sum payment. And so therefore this is similar to Ribit case. And here also, we're not going to say that the estate is going to pay for her sustenance all these years. Again, if the kid's 5 years old and she's going to be taking money every day, so then that's going to erode the estate. Instead, the apotropos is authorized to pay the entire ketubah, one lump sum, and therefore it will not erode further the estate. So Rabbi Yochanan adds only this, but that's it. He says for other payments, no, you cannot take from the estate. So that would mean that in terms of the nizikin, that the steward is not authorized to take the estate to pay for damages done by the ox of the yatom. And so this is in contradiction to the Rabbi Yochanan's statement here that says if there is a shor mu'ad, we appoint a steward, and if it goes and gores again, then the steward is authorized to take from the best land of the yatom to pay for the damage. But here he says, no, there's only two exceptions, and that's not, nizikin is not one of them. So we have a couple of answers. Answer number one is ipuch. Rabbi Yochanan amar me'aliyat apotropsin. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina amar me'aliyat yetomim. Maybe we got the order, the opinions wrong, and we have to switch them around. In fact, Rabbi Yochanan is the one that says that we pay, that the apotropos, steward, has to pay from his own money, and it is Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. He said that you pay from the orphan. So now there's no contradiction to Rabbi Yochanan. He's consistent. You do not take from the money of the orphans, only for those two things, and not for nizikin. Apotropos, you should have been more careful with this animal to make sure it wouldn't gore. Okay, so now we saved Rabbi Yochanan, but now we got Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. We ascribe to him the more problematic response. So Rava doesn't like that. Amar Rava mishum de kashyat Rabbi Yochanan mashvit le Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina to'eh. Rava, it's a good question. Because you have a challenge against Rabbi Yochanan, you have that contradiction between two statements of Rabbi Yochanan. So now, fine, you saved Rabbi Yochanan, but now you're going to give the mistaken opinion, that one that we don't like, to Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina. We know about him. He has a great reputation of being a judge who goes into the depths of the complexities of the law, right? And so he really knows what he's talking about, especially regarding civil law and monetary matters. And so you're going to ascribe to him this law that is problematic. So therefore, we don't want to say that Rabbi Yosef said that. You know what? Leave the opinions as they were before. In fact, Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina, the great judge, he says that the apotropos has to pay, and Rabbi Yochanan is in fact the one that says we extract money from the yetomin. Umazik shane, and mazik is exceptional. We certainly cannot have a situation where nobody pays for such damages, because then you're going to have oxen going around, even shon mu'ad, and say, oh well, they're minors and they're just going to continue to do that, and no one to stop them. So certainly someone has to pay, and so who's going to pay? Rabbi Yochanan amar me'aliyat yetomin di'amat me'aliyat apotropos memana'eh ve'la abdi. So Rabbi Yochanan says that you're going to have to take the money from the best land of the yetomim, because if you take the money from the apotropos, and maybe by rights that it should, because he was the one that was negligent as a steward of the property and of the oxen, but if you do that, then nobody will ever want to be a steward. Like, why take upon yourself that financial responsibility? Right, you're trying to help out some orphans, but then something goes wrong, you have to pay from your own property, so then you're exposing yourself to a lot of liability. And so therefore, really, maybe it should be an apotropos, and no one will want to be such a steward, and therefore has to be that we take from the yetomim. And so Rabbi Yochanan, in fact, we saw two exceptions to the rule where we take from the property of yetomim, and mazik is another one. He didn't list them because it's not within the realm of he was talking about examples not within the realm of nizikin, but nizikin also is something that certainly someone has to pay, and apotropos is not going to want to pay, so you have to take it from the yetomim so that there'll be consequences and a deterrent for further actions by such oxen. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina amar me'aliyat apotropos v'chozrin v'nifra'in min hayetomim lechi gadle. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina says, no, you take it from the apotropos, because we're not authorized to go and take from the property of the orphans while they're young. Or however, the apotropos, don't worry about him. He will go ahead and get paid back from the orphans when they grow up, right? Once they grow up, the apotropos says, listen, a few years ago, you were 5 years old, your ox went and caused damage, your shod mu'ad, and I had to pay out of pocket because I wasn't yet authorized to take from you. But it was in fact your ox, and therefore you are responsible. And so now that you're an adult, now you are responsible to pay me back. And so now apotropos would be willing to be such, because even though he has to pay out of pocket, but he'll get the money back eventually. And so that's the better way to go, and that explains their machloket. Now the Gemara adds a further explanation. And that which we said before, that according to the Mishnah, a shor that is owned by a minor or someone incompetent, they do not have to pay. You do not appoint a apotropos to pay as a tam. You will appoint a apotropos after it does a few times, and then in order to make it a mu'ad, you need a steward, so they will testify in front of the steward, and then it becomes mu'ad, and then if it goes again, the payment has to be made as a mu'ad. But the shor of a minor does not pay as when it's tam, and we do not appoint for them an apotropos. That's how we explain the Mishnah. And now we're going to point out that this, in fact, is a subject to a machloket Tanaim, and our Mishnah is only giving you one of two opinions as follows. Te Tanya, shor shenitcharshu be'alav, v'shenishtatu be'alav, v'shalchu be'alav limedinat hayam, Yehuda ben Nakosa amar sumchus, harehu betamuto, ad sheya'idu bo bifnei ha'be'alim. Hachamim omerim, ma'amidin lahen apotropin, u'midin bahem bifnei apotropin. If we have an ox that belongs to someone who became deaf, or someone who became insane, or someone where the owner left on a trip and he's not around. So according to Yehuda ben Nakosa, in the name of Sumchus, it remains as a tam until witnesses can come and testify in front of the owner, meaning until the owner comes back to sanity or back to the country. But as long as there is no competent owner, the witnesses do not testify, right? So you see that sounds from here that there is no payment given. Chachamim, however, say that if the owner is not around or not competent, then the Bet Din will appoint an apotropos for them, and the witnesses that saw it gore will come and testify in front of them. And it sounds like that they will have to pay. And we're going to prove in a second that this is all talking about a tam. Now, the second half of the same baraita is nitpakeach hacheresh, nishtapa hashote, v'higdil hakatan, uba'u be'alam Medinat hayam, Yehuda ben Nakosa amar sumchus, chazal letamuto ad she'idu bo bifnei be'alim. Rabbi Yosef amar harehu bechazkato. If the deaf owner now regained his hearing, or the insane owner became sane, or there was a minor and he got bigger. You see, the minor, it doesn't mention the minor here because you can't have an adult that becomes a child, but you can have a child that becomes an adult. So here we're talking about places where there is an owner, is a competent owner, but then it was gone. So you can't use a minor for that. But in this example, where we're talking about cases where there was no competent minor, but now there is, so now you can include this. Okay, or the owner was absent, but now he returned. Now there is an owner. What do we do then? So according to Yehuda ben Nakosa, name of Sumchus, if it was mu'ad, it goes back to being tam, and it will remain tam until witnesses come now and say, oh, it gored 3 times, and then it will become a mu'ad. But it resets and is no longer mu'ad, even though it gored when there was away and there was a steward that made it that was appointed, and they testified in front of the steward and became mu'ad. But now when the owner comes back, it goes back to being tam, and new witnesses will have to come to make it mu'ad again. Rabbi Yosef, however, says it remains mu'ad if it became mu'ad when the owner was away and they testified in front of the steward. It keeps that same status, and this is the same as the machloket we saw in the Mishnah, where Sumchus is the same as Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Yosef is the same as Rabbi Yosef, because that's the same person. All right, now let's analyze. Amru, mai harehu betamuto. What does that mean over here, where it says that if the owner is away or not competent, it remains tam. Dekamar sumchus. Ile madela mi'aed kelal, hamedikatani sefa chazal tamuta miklal de'iya'ad. If you say that the witnesses that it does not become mu'ad at all, right? It remains tam no matter what happens. It remains tam even if it gores 100 times. while the owner is away. If you think that's what it means, that can't be, because in the Sefa, where Sumchus also is giving his opinion, it says if it was mu'ad, then it goes back to being tam when the owner comes back. So obviously there is some way that it can become a mu'ad even when the owner is away. So harehu betammuto cannot possibly mean that it remains tam forever. It has to mean that witnesses will in fact come and make it and declare it mu'ad. Ela mai harehu betamuto, harehu betimimuto, de la mechaserinan le. No, it means that it remains whole, such that we do not reduce its value in payment for any of the gorings that it did while it was a tam. So you see, this is actually the same as the Tanakama, the same as our Mishnah as opinion, because we're saying that, listen, if it gores once, twice, 3 times, we don't do anything when there's let's say it's a minor or the owner is away. We don't do anything at all, and nobody has to pay. That's the law. And so, because if you did have to pay, it would reduce from the value. Let's say you gored and there were $10 worth of damage. So then you'd have to, sell or reduce the value of the animal from that much. No, we don't reduce the value. No one pays. However, there is still a mechanism for it to become mu'ad, which is, if it gores 3 times, then we appoint a steward, even according to the Mishnah, even according to Sumchus, and the witnesses will come and say, it gored 3 times, such that it will be a mu'ad. Still doesn't have to go and pay for what happened before, under the steward, but it will become a mu'ad. So you see that Sumchus is in fact the same as our Mishnah. Alma en ma'amidin apotropos tatam ligbot migufo. We see in fact according to Sumchus, we do not appoint a steward in order to make him pay from the value of the animal. We only appoint a steward in order to give it a status of a mu'ad, such that if it gores a 4th time after that, then someone will have to pay. Hachamim אומרים מעמידין להן אפוטרופוס ומדין להם בפני אפוטרופוס alma מעמידין אפוטרופוס לתם לגבות מגופו. But Hachamim will disagree and says that we do appoint a steward, and they come and the witnesses come and testify in front of the steward even for the first 3 times. You see that we appoint a steward right away, so that someone will have to pay even for the gorings while it was a tam, and that it reduces the value of the animal itself, the goring animal, because there is payment made. So although we saw in the Mishnah that there is no payment for while it's a tam, that was only the opinion of Sumchos, and Chachamim disagree and say we appoint a steward, and the steward will subject to the other machloket who has to pay, but payment will be given to the nizak even for the short tam. Now, v'sefa b'may kami palge, the sefa of that baraita, what's at the root of their machloket? And the answer is reshut meshanaika benaihu. Sumchos sabar reshut meshana, Rabbi Yosef sabar reshut ena hameshana. It's the same machloket that we talked about before in the Mishnah, which is whether a change in ownership or change in custody, does that change its status? Sumchus says that a change in custody does change the status, and even though it became a mu'ad under the steward, once the owner comes back to town, right? I mean, a lot of times, pets, whatever, they might misbehave when there's someone else taking care of them, but when their own owner comes back, then they'll be calmer and behave. So just because it acted in a violent way, mu'ad under the steward, doesn't mean it's going to act violent way when it has its owner back. And therefore, it goes back to being tam. And that was the same as the opinion of Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah. And Rabbi Yosef says a change of custody does not change its status. And if it became mu'ad under a steward, then it remains mu'ad, even after the steward grows up or comes back or becomes hearing again. And the status does not change. And Rabbi Yosef is the same as the Rabbi Yosef in the Mishnah. Now that we see that the opinion of Chachamim is actually that a shor tam owned by a minor does have to pay because you appoint an apotropos, and so they'll have to pay chasi nezek. Now we're going to see another Tana who agrees with that opinion, combined with some other complicated factors. Totenot banan shor hare shotev katan shenagach. Rabbi Yaakov Meshalem Chasi Nezek. This Baraita says that an ox of a deaf or an insane person or a minor that gores, Rabbi Yaakov pays half nezek. Now first we have to clarify. Rabbi Yaakov, my abidite, what did Rabbi Yaakov do that he has to pay? It's saying any ox that gores, Rabbi Yaakov has to pay? What does this mean? Ela ema Rabbi Yaakov omer mishalem chasi nezek. No, Rabbi Yaakov doesn't have to pay. He is ruling that one has to pay chasi nezek. Okay, I don't know what the original was supposed to mean and why it's recorded, even if it seems like to be completely mistake. Maybe Rabbi Yaakov was a apostrophe for someone, and so that was the law. That I don't know. Okay, I'm not sure what the original context of that was. Anyway, now we clarified it. Rabbi Yaakov rules that cheresh shotev katan have to pay for their shor that gores, and that is going to be chasi nezek. Now let's figure out what case is it talking about in particular. Now this would seem to be actually the simplest explanation. That's talking about a shor tam, and the Yaakov is telling us that yes, he has to pay, and even though it's cheresh shotev katan, but we don't accept that because we say this would be obvious. Everyone agrees that. Now, when we say everyone agrees, well, we did say that Chachamim think so, so that is the opinion of the majority, but that's not quite everyone. Hey, what it seems to mean here is that, well, if it's a shor tam, then obviously you're going to pay chasi nezek. Does anybody think that a shor tam is going to pay full nezek? So if it is a shor tam, then obviously you're going to say be chasi nezek. So just say that what is chayav, and then I'll figure out it's chasi nezek because it's tam. If it's mu'ad, what kind of case is it? If whoever was in charge did the apotropos, whoever did a proper safeguard of it, then one should not have to pay. In other words, if you do, you put walls, thick walls and everything, and you guard your ox well, and somehow it gets out. So it's anus, you shouldn't have to pay. And if he did not guard it at all, then one should have to pay the entire amount. Why would you have to pay chasi nezek in a case of mu'ad, right? What could possibly be a case of shor mu'ad where you'd only have to pay half? All right, so this is a good question. We're going to see a couple of explanations. Amar Rava, le'olam b'mu'ad. Rava says, in fact, yes, it is talking about mu'ad, and you gave me the opposite, the extreme examples of no safeguarding at all or full safeguarding, but actually it's talking about where he did minimal safeguarding, but not superior safeguarding. He didn't put up a nice big wall. He put a flimsy wall that a wind can come and knock down. He did something, but not quite sufficient. Now, how does that help us? Rabbi Yaakov, in order to get to the chasi nezek, he has to make a number of assumptions and agreements with other Tanaim. As follows: Rabbi Yaakov Savala, Rabbi Yehuda Damar, Sad Tamut Bimkoma Omedet. First of all, he's going to agree with Rabbi Yehuda, who says that when someone has to pay full amount for a shor mu'ad, half of it is still a payment as you would pay if it was a shor tam. When it's a shor tam, you have to pay half chasi nezek. That payment continues even when it's mu'ad. You pay it with the same restrictions from the body of it, even when it's mu'ad. That's 50% of the payment. Only the other 50%, the added to get to the full nezek, that is for it being mu'ad, and that you'd pay from the best land. So really, it's 2 half payments, and therefore you'd apply the rules of, well, if it were tam, would you have to pay? If it were mu'ad, would you have to pay? Good. That's a very important rule. Now, v'sabar like Rabbi Yehuda Damar mu'ad sagi le b'shmira pechuta. He also, Rabbi Yaakov, in saying chasi nezek here, also agrees with another statement of Rabbi Yehuda. This is found on Daf 45b. Rabbi Yehuda says that in order to be liable to pay as a shor mu'ad, it's sufficient that it be even a little bit, a minimal safeguard. In other words, as long as you had minimal safeguard, you don't have to pay. You don't need full safeguard to be not liable for mu'ad. If you did zero safeguarding, then you're liable to mu'ad. But if you did some safeguarding, then you don't have to. Okay, take these two assumptions plus one more. And Rabbi Yaakov agrees with Chachamim that we saw in the previous section of this daf, that for a short time of cheresh shoteh v'katan, the Bet Din appoints apotropos, and the witnesses come and testify in front of the apotropos, and they do pay chasi nezik for a short time. Now, if we take all these together, so let's see, we're talking about a case of a short mu'ad where someone did minimal safeguarding. Okay, so what will be the law? So the payment was, since it's short mu'ad, half of it is as a tam and half of it is as a mu'ad. Let's take the short tam piece. Short tam, well, Rabbi Yaakov agrees with Rabbanan that even cheresh shoteh v'katan, you appoint a steward and you pay for it. So there you go. That half you have to pay. What about the mu'ad half? Well, Rabbi Yaakov also agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that as long as you did minimal safeguarding, you don't have to pay as a shor mu'ad, and therefore that half of it you don't have to pay. This is how Rabbi Yaakov got to chasi nezek. He's talking about a shor mu'ad. And it's simply that the only has to pay for the tam part, not for the mu'ad part. Gemara is going to ask in a little while, why not just say he's talking about a short tam? Wouldn't that be a simpler explanation? Okay, but in the meantime, we have a challenge. Amar le Abaye. Abaye asks Rava, Vela pelige? Really? Are you telling me that Rabbi Yaakov agrees with Rabbi Yehuda? And he agrees on two different halachot that we just saw. V'hatanya shor shel cheresh shoteh v'katan shenagach. Rabbi Yehuda mechayev, Rabbi Yaakov omer hasi nezek hu dimshalem. Look at this baraita. That says ox of a cheresh shoteh v'katan that gores. Rabbi Yehuda says one is liable, which sounds like he's liable 100%, and Rabbi Yaakov says only hasi nezek. In fact, the first baraita that we quoted up here sounds like it's actually a piece of this, but the baraita that we just quoted. Let's call this the first baraita, right? Rabbi Yaakov says, "Omer meshalem chasi nezek." Let's call this the second baraita, where it quotes Rabbi Yehuda, and then Rabbi Yaakov says, "Chasi nezek udim shalem." Right. So you see, in the full context, if Rabbi Yaakov above is just a snippet of this baraita, maybe it's a separate baraita. Anyway, it's just the baraita number 2 shows that there's a machloket. So Rava, how can you say that Rabbi Yaakov agrees with Rabbi Yehuda when you see there's a machloket here? Amar Rabba bar Ula, Mash mechayev Rabbi Yehuda peresh Rabbi Yaakov. So Rabba bar Ula comes to save Rava, and it says, no, he's only explaining. Rabbi Yehuda said one is chayav. What is he chayav? Rabbi Yehuda left that vague. So Rabbi Yaakov comes and says, oh, when Rabbi Yehuda said chayav, don't think he meant full amount. What he meant is half the amount. And see, Rabbi Yaakov agrees with Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, this makes sense for Rava. Rabba bar Ula is helping Rava, and by explaining that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov are in agreement. That's what Rabbi Yaakov has to rely on, two of Rabbi Yehuda's assumptions, to get to this conclusion. Okay, good. All that is good. One good explanation for Rabbi Yaakov's statement that one pays half nezek. But Ulabaye damar pelige b'may pelige. Abaye, just because he has an answer doesn't mean Abaye has to accept it. Abaye reads this baraita to mean that they are in disagreement, and if they're in disagreement, then what is the disagreement, and how can we explain Rabbi Yaakov? Because Rabbi Yaakov has to disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, so we can't say that he agrees with him on everything. So Abaye says, I agree. He's talking about a shur mu'ad, but not a case where there was minimal safeguarding, but rather in a case where there was no safeguarding at all. And we could still get to the chasi nezek as follows. Rabbi Yaakov sabar like Rabbi Yehuda bechada, ufaleg ale bechada. Rabbi Yaakov agrees with Rabbi Yehuda on one point, but disagrees on another point. Sabar Rabbi Yehuda bechada, il Rabbi Yehuda sabar sad tamut b'mkom ha'amedet. On the one hand, he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that the payment of full nezek for a mu'ad is actually comprised of two components. Don't think that when it leaves tam and becomes mu'ad, now you pay the whole thing from the best land and now it's considered just mu'ad and the tam status is gone altogether. Don't think that. Rather, he agrees with Rabbi Yehuda that the full payment of Nezek Shalem for Mu'ad is made up of two components, half of it as a tam and half of it as a Mu'ad. מעמידין להן האפוטרופוס לתם לגבות מגופו, ורבי יעקב סבר אין מעמידין ולא משלם אלא פלגה דמועד. However, he disagrees on one point with Rabbi Yehuda, whereas Rabbi Yehuda thinks that we do appoint a steward for the short tam of a cheresh shotev katan, and therefore they have to pay from the value of the animal for the chasi nezek of tam. But Rabbi Yaakov disagrees on that point, and he thinks, like our Mishnah, that you do not appoint, and like Sumchos, that you do not appoint a steward, and the cheresh shotev katan does not have to pay chasi nezek for short tam, but rather only as mu'ad. Therefore, so let's see, the case is where it was a mu'ad and there was no safeguarding at all. Now, according to Rabbi Yaakov, do you have to pay as tam? No, because there's no steward and you don't pay for the half of tam. How about for mu'ad? Yes, because it was not watched at all, and so you have to pay for the short tam half. That's how you get half. So Rava and Abaye are actually opposite. Rava thinks that you have to pay for the half for the tam, but not the half of the mu'ad. Abaye thinks that you don't have to pay for the half of the tam, and you do have to pay for the half of the mu'ad. Amar le Rav Aha bar Abaye le Ravina. Bishlam l'Abaye damar pelige shapir. So Rav Aha tells bar Abaye tells Ravina, I understand Abaye's explanation, because he explained that second braita on top of this page here, that they are arguing. That explanation makes sense to me. According to Rava, who says that they're not arguing, why go through the trouble of saying that it's talking about a mu'ad where there was minimal safeguard? Just say it was a short tam. Why do you have to pay chasi nezek? Because it was a short tam. Wouldn't that be an easier explanation? And within this explanation of it being a short tam, there's two ways of explaining the case of how much safeguarding it was. If you follow, if Rabbi Yaakov in this aspect follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, it would have to be a case where he did minimal safeguarding, but not very good safeguarding, because according to the Yehuda, and this is the Mishnah later on 45b, he says there that short tam, if you do maximum safeguarding, then you don't have to pay. But if you do minimum safeguarding, then only do minimum safeguarding, then you still do have to pay for a short tam. Not only if you do no safeguarding, certainly you have to pay for a short tam, but minimal safeguarding also you have to pay for a short tam. So then we can explain that it is talking about a case where we did minimal safeguarding, but not 100% safeguarding. And that's if you want to follow the Yehuda. And if you want Rabbi Yaakov, you can also follow the Eliezer ben Yaakov, that he did zero safeguarding at all. Because he disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, and he thinks whether it's tam and mu'ad, as long as you did minimal safeguarding, you don't have to pay. So if it was minimal safeguarding, you wouldn't have to pay at all. So it can't be that according to Rabbi Eliezer, but it would have to be when you did no safeguarding. And what would be the point of Rabbi Yaakov? That before we said, Peshita, he'll be teaching us something important, that we follow the opinion that we do appoint an apotropos for a short tam of a cheresh shotev katan, such that you have to pay for it from the worth of the animal, that we're following the opinion of Chachamim, right? So to say simply, if you want to follow Rava, that there's no disagreement in the second braita above, then you can simply explain this as being a short tam, and it doesn't really matter whichever way you want to go, if it was whether it was half safeguarding or no safeguarding, and that would be a simpler explanation. V'teh ta'ama. Ravina answered him and explained, well, yeah, if you explain that baraita, the second baraita, to say that he's in agreement with Rabbi Yehuda, you have to explain why. What's the point of it being agreement? And in fact, this is in fact one ruling, but it has two elements of its reason, and that's why you have to say it's a compound law. It's talking about a short mu'ad. And yes, you're right. And we have to add that he's following Rabbi Yehuda, who says that you split the tam payment and the mu'ad payment. The mu'ad payment is made up of two halves. So see, since that second braita says that Rabbi Yaakov is following Rabbi Yehuda, you have to explain that this is a case where he would need to follow Rabbi Yehuda. If it's such a short tam, he doesn't have to follow Rabbi Yehuda. He could follow Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov also with regard to what case it is, if it's what level of safeguarding it is. Now, since the braita said he is following and explaining Rabbi Yehuda, you have to say he's following Rabbi Yehuda in the sense that the full payment is made up of two halves, and the short tam part, yes, he pays for because he thinks that you do make a steward and you pay that much, but the mu'ad part you don't pay because it's only a minimal. Because it's a minimal safeguard, and that is sufficient for mu'ad, and you don't have to pay. Okay, Ravina Amar. After all that, now we have a completely different explanation of the second braita, the braita that records a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov, and according to this explanation, it has nothing to do with with this Ravan Abaye's issue. So it's much simpler reading. Reshut mishanaika benaihu. The difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yaakov is when it changes custody. Machloket that we already saw in the Mishnah, and we saw again with Sumchos and Chachamim. Kegon davar mu'ad v'nitpakeach echeresh v'ishtapa hashoteh v'gdil hakatan. It's a case where it is a short mu'ad, but the owner was deaf and got better, or was not sane and got better, or was a minor and grew up. The difficulty of this explanation is it didn't say that in the Braita, so you have to add in this big ukimta. But if you're willing to do that, then it reads simply: Rabbi Yehuda sabar harehu bechezkato, Rabbi Yaakov sabar reshut mishanam. Rabbi Yehuda says it remains mu'ad. It became mu'ad when the owner was a minor, and now the owner grew up and it gored someone after that. It remains mu'ad, and that's why chayav, meaning you have to pay full nezek, because it stays the same status. Rabbi Yaakov says no. Once he was a minor and now he's an adult, or it's he got better, so now this is a change in custody, and therefore it loses mu'ad status and goes back to tam. And that's why Rabbi Yaakov says he only has to pay chasi nezek. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.